right, good evening. You're probably thinking, wow, this is the best Pastor Alvin has ever looked. Don't worry, it's being recorded. I hope he watches. No, Pastor Alvin, he texted us yesterday. He wasn't feeling too hot, and we got a text about 11 this morning that said, I have no voice. What's the plan for tonight? And the plan for tonight was Jason randomly has been selected and put on a jury. So he's been in jury duty since Tuesday, and he got off at 6, and there was no way that I was going to say, well, I'm not doing tonight. You're going to have to show up and be ready, Jason. And so I jumped in. So Ezra 9 and 10, we will finish up the book of Ezra tonight. Hopefully have some good closing thoughts, some good discussion time, and also, just kind of dive into these last two chapters. I think one of the things that I've been noticing before we recap quickly and then I break you up into groups is what I've noticed, and I think we're going to notice exceptionally well tonight, that Ezra really causes us to think about the journey that we're on in life with the Lord. I really believe that it begins to break down things that you and I, we're like, oh, that's drama. Oh, I don't want that in my life. No, I can't do all that. But I think what it does is it causes us to really assess where we're at in the Christian life and understand that life in the Christian life is not free from hassle just because we're with the Lord. And we're going to see that tonight just really clearly, because we talked about last week when we broke this down. This is the timeline. Any homeschoolers in here? Anytime I say the word timeline, all I think is timeline. If you did classical conversations. In fact, recently I was talking about Nehemiah to my wife, and she goes, wait. The Persians overcame the Babylonians in 6. And I was like, no, you're not singing that song. Because the Babylonians ransack Jerusalem, and they get overtaken by the Persian Empire, and then the Persian Empire is the one who set the Israelites free to come back to Jerusalem on Cyrus's decree in chapter 1. The first 6 chapters of the book cover the first 20 years of their time back from captivity, back from exile. And the temple is rebuilt. King Cyrus issues the decree, sends Zerubbabel back. We learned that in chapters 1 through 6. They rebuilt the temple. The gap of 58 years between chapter 6 and chapter 7, we call that the Esther gap. That's during the reign of Artaxerxes. It's a 58-year gap. Artaxerxes' son takes the throne, and the last 3 chapters, so from last week in 7 all the way to 10, so the last 4 chapters, is the man whose name graces this fine literary structure, Ezra. On the second return under King Artaxerxes, who is the son of Xerxes, and he comes back to reform the people before, in a couple weeks, we will jump into the book of Nehemiah. We also have to remember that Ezra and Nehemiah were one literary unit. We broke them up hundreds of years later, okay? All right, quick recap of just the history of the timeline. Recap, Pastor Jason gave us an overview of the book, and we're going to talk about it a little bit today because I think one of the things that he expressed about the word exile has just been something that has stuck with me. I mentioned it last week, but I'll mention it again this week because it's going to be something that I think we're continuously having to deal with. Even once we move out of the book of Ezra, we're going to have to realize that when we find ourselves in this place of exile, it's because we've been operating out of our own strength. Okay? There is a renewal that's taking place, and I believe that the renewal that we're experiencing even right now is a renewal to realize that we are not supposed to live this life of faith out of our own strength. Pretty simple. But we do live out of our own strength all the time, and when we do, the Lord is gracious and kind and merciful, but oftentimes we find ourselves here in this place of exile. So exile, we find ourselves there when we operate out of our own strength. Pastor Alvin in week 1 talked about Cyrus's decree, sending them back with tangible items of hope. Go back and listen to that. That was really, really good. I thought Alvin caught a stride that night, and we caught a little prophetic window, which was really profound. Week 2, I talked about the foundations of renewal, and the renewal of the altar and the foundation of the temple being based on the worship and the prayer, and about it being based on the nature of God and not based on our record. Rebecca Rogers did an exceptional job a couple weeks back on chapters 5 and 6 when she talked about prophetic recollection, and she asked us to enter into the story. I'm going to ask us to do that again tonight. I think that'll be fun. And then last week I covered Ezra 7 and 8 when we talked about this Ezra. We got a little bit to working knowledge of who this character Ezra is, and maybe why was he selected by God and also Artaxerxes to come back and to bring a reform to the people, that he was an incarnational liver. Remember, he was a learner of the law. He desired to live the law and also to give the law away. That is the 3-step process by which we make things incarnational. We don't just hold on to them, we give them away. And that he was a student of the law. So, yeah, that's a quick recap. Now we're going to jump in, okay? So, last week I made a statement that we are all Ezras, okay? I want that to be a backdrop of a little bit of also tonight, that we live incarnationally. That's the call for all of us as believers of Jesus, is not just to know his truth, not just desire to learn his truth, but desire to live his truth and give his truth away. Amen? And so tonight, we have Ezra showing up in chapter 7, but we begin to see the purpose of why Ezra has been sent back very quickly in chapter 9. Ezra's purpose for returning was to bring a reform to the people. They went back to build the temple, but Ezra, a student, or what we today might call like a genius in the law, or like an expert in the law, goes back to bring a reform to the people. And it says that, I want you to put yourself in this situation. Ezra has come back. He's come with an edict from Artaxerxes. He comes and he's to deliver information to not just the people who are on the ground in Jerusalem, but also to the governors and the princes who have been put in place by the empire of Persia and by Artaxerxes. And he gives them all of the information. Now, something fun about 9 and 10 that's just Bible trivia, okay? This event has been plucked from the timeline, okay? This might get even a little confusing, so just track with me. And it doesn't have a lot of purpose. But it'll make a whole lot more sense when we work into Nehemiah, okay? This incident in 9 and 10, most historians believe didn't actually occur as soon as they got back into the land. They believe that after the law came forth and Ezra reads it in the latter half of the book of Nehemiah, that this event now happened. Okay? They don't actually, because the reason why is because they didn't have the law. They knew how to work, they knew of certain things concerning the law, but the memorization or the reading of the law, they didn't have it. So Ezra comes back with the law, and after he reads the law, this event now takes place. Now, you're probably wondering, Jordan, why the heck would they do this out of order? Why would they remove this from the chronological order of the text, and would they put it at the end of the story of Ezra? Well, I can tell you why. And I'm going to be making a slight hypothesis. Ezra really wants to be Moses. Like, really bad. In fact, I wrote Ezra's reform, and then in my own notes wrote Moses squared. Because if you understand the literary structure as to what Ezra is doing in this part of his writing, he is trying to write himself into another Exodus story as Moses. And so what he's doing is he's taking something that happens a little bit later, and he's putting it right there in the coming back of the land, because what Moses does when he pulls the people from Egypt is he has to get Egypt out of the people, right? And so he brings them, the Lord leads them to the wilderness. Well, the same thing happens. And when the law comes, what ends up happening? Do we know what happens when Moses goes up the mountain to get the law? What happens? What do the people do? They make a golden calf, right? And that is the impurity of the people coming out of them as the law of God is coming. And so now the law of God is coming. What is the error of the people's ways that is going to be revealed because of the law? This is why Ezra plucks this, and he says, at the reading of the law, the error of the people was exposed, and I, Moses incarnate, brought forth rebuke. Okay? Just like Moses did to the people. So that's why most historians believe this section was plucked, placed in as a literary structure to show God was doing another Exodus. And like he did in the original Exodus, he's doing again. He raised up a judge, a deliverer, someone to free the people. That's a common Old Testament trend, theme, works throughout all of the Old Testament. It's not something new. It's not just Moses and Ezra. We see the same pattern in the period of the Judges. We see it a lot, right? David, the same thing. Saul, the people cry out for a king. He gives them a deliverer. All right, similar tactic. Ezra just utilizes it with Israel's history to basically make this epic moment take place. Okay? Y'all with me? All right, good. Somebody said so far. All right. You're going to break up to groups in 2 seconds, but I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to picture this with me. You have just heard the standard of God read to you. It has been the first time in maybe 100 years or 150 years you have heard the reading of the law of God, and your hearts have been pricked, they've been convicted, and you begin to recognize that what's being read to your ears, that you are listening to, you are actually doing. And the Lord says that what you're doing is an abomination. And you've not known this, you've not understood this, but now you're hearing this for the first time, maybe in 100 years or more, that this is an error. And the error is this, that who you're married to, you're not supposed to be married to. That who you have children with, that who you've lived everyday life with in a covenant of marriage, that the person that you're looking at is, to the Lord, is an abomination. Ugh. And in that place, someone comes to Ezra and says this: the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands. According to their abomination, those of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has intermingled with the people of the lands. Indeed, the hands of the princes and the rulers have been foremost in this unfaithfulness. So Ezra comes back, not just to reform the people, but the first place he has to start with, the first place almost always it gets started with, is with the people who are dealing with the ceremonial work of God. The Levites and the priests have gone in complete abomination to the Lord, and they've begun to take wives and husbands from people that are not Jewish by blood. Okay? I want you to break up into groups. I'm going to ask you a question. So break up into groups of 3 or 4. Get that as the backdrop of your mind. You've just been told your spouse is an abomination. Not in real life, people. All right. Like last week, you've got the text. Hopefully you came with your Bible to Bible study. If you didn't, hopefully somebody in your group does. That's why we're breaking up. I want you to utilize verse 3 to verse 15, okay? That's almost the entire chapter of chapter 9 to answer this question. There's 2 questions, actually. How does Ezra respond to this news? How does Ezra respond to this news? And then you will see that Ezra goes into prayer. I want you to answer this question. What is striking to you about Ezra's prayer? What is striking to you about Ezra's prayer. So, like, what sensations, what images, what feelings, what thoughts come to your mind when you are reading his prayer? Something that stands out to you. I'm going to give you about 7-8 minutes to jump into this idea, and we'll circle back and we'll hear some answers. one more minute. All right. Let's wrap up some thoughts. 10 seconds. I heard a lot of chatter. All right. Who wants to? I started over there last week. Let's start over here this week. All right. What was Ezra's response? We'll start there. Ezra's response. Ezra's response to this abomination amongst the Levitical line. Okay? I'll write down one of them, but you can say them both. How would you describe that in one word? Yeah, there you go. It's a collective fault. Hmm. Okay. So there was an agreement in the prayer. I like that. Okay. Did you have anything on his response? Anything that you noticed in the earlier parts before he began to pray? Yeah, he pulled out his hair. I was like, ow. Lennox will pull on my beard from time to time, and like, you don't ever have like a gut impulse to punch a baby. Like, it's just not something you just ever want to vocalize outwardly. But sometimes when he really gets a hold of that beard hair, like, you threaten something in your brain. You don't ever do it, but man, the thought comes. Kelsey, yeah, equivalent to being bit while breastfeeding, I feel like. Probably not, but that's like one of those husband things that like you just shouldn't do, but you do only because you know you're going to get punched for it later. So she'll listen to this and punch me. It's not even close. That's what she'll say. All right. Next group, the Dylans. Did you have any thoughts? Separation. I like that. That's really good. Next group. What do we got? Ezra's prayer. He saw grace. Grace. Anything on Ezra's response? Kev? Anything on his response? Well, his prayer is how he interacts. What was he like when he received the information? What happened? Anything? You don't have to. I'm just asking. Oh, okay. Operates out of grace. That's good. Okay. There's no wrong answers here. I just thought I'd ask because only one answer. Well, you guys a separate group? No, you guys were together? Okay, cool. What about right here in the front? What you guys got?
What struck me about the second part of the prayer was Ezra was talking about how God did not abandon the Israelites out of his loving kindness
Hmm.
/ lavish mercy.
Yeah. Oof. Somebody's got a good translation of the Bible. You reading out of the Amplified? Did I hear you say that? Yeah. I was like, those are multiple words that all mean the same one. What about back here? What do you guys got? Oof. Outraged. That's a good word. I like that. Blown away. The response is, the question is exactly how you're responding. It's just how do you feel he felt when he's hearing this information? How do you perceive the words he's saying in his response? You guys. Shame. That's good. I like that. Ooh. Shameful prayer. Eesh. All right. About back here. Say that again. Didn't want to waste the moment for reconciliation. I like that. Silly. That's an A. Don't waste the moment. I like that. I feel that as well. And last group. Or is there two more? Oh, two more. You guys right here. Mm. He was appalled. He was appalled. I looked up that word. It means that he sat stunned in silence. Thought that was quite interesting. And he tore his clothes, yeah. Next group. Last one. You guys? Have some thoughts? Or are they all pretty much up there? Hey, hey, I hear that. I hear that.
Ezra's response is the classic repentance response.
Yeah.
So, no one said that yet, but
Mm-hmm.
everything that he did is considered traditional
Repentant heart, yeah.
in the Jewish mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof. That's so good. I think that's a point that we'll bring up in chapter 2. He wasn't defensive. That's really good. I like that a lot. I'm going to write that one down. Not defensive. I like that. These are all great responses. I think that when we look at Ezra, if we all think of ourselves as Ezras, we can learn something incredibly significant to our walks as leaders in how Ezra postures himself in face of something that absolutely he could have never imagined he was coming back to deal with. Like, I wish I could come up with a modern day analogy. Can you come up with one quickly of what it would be like to be sent as a leader into a community of leaders who have been gone back ahead of you, and they're supposed to be pioneering this way, this incredible way of life and living, and you go back to see that, like, one of the first instructions of how they were to not operate within the land, they're already been doing for like 60 years, 80 years, and you're like, no, we're already way, way behind. And I feel like when we read this, when we read about his response, we can take notes, because we can learn how to. I'll put it like this. I used to own a dog walking company. I don't know if anybody knows that. I used to walk canines for a living. I used to clean up dog crap, and now I clean up people's crap. Sorry, that somebody once said that to me, and I was like, I'm gonna say that again someday, and I'm gonna say it from the pulpit. So you guys have been the first that were graced with that quote. Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, my wife's incredible. She doesn't make me change too many diapers, but there are occasions when she looks at me and it's like, "This one's yours." But, anyways, I used to work. I was a co-owner of the business actually with a young lady who lived a counter lifestyle to our culture, and she was a lesbian, and I became just like best friends with her. And before I owned the business with her, I worked for her. In fact, it's a crazy God story how the Lord brought me working for a dog walking company and meeting this sweet, incredible human being. And, well, you know, me, young, zealous Jordan. Yep. You know, you already know where this story's going. You know, one of the first things I told her is that I was a Christian and that I was in ministry, and that I got no problem with the way you live. So I said to her, because I was like, well, what am I supposed to say? Because she immediately asked me all these theological questions. And I skirted them somehow. I can't remember exactly how, but I did because, you know, I really needed a job. And wasn't about to lose it in the interview on some spiritual technicality, right? I don't think I could have if I tried. But for about a 1.5 year long period, all she did was try to make me judge her. Like, she would tell me the most outlandish stories with every detail. And I would be like, as I'm feeling all my purity and holiness leave, as I'm listening to every detail of her story, and I remember thinking in my head, she just wants me to judge her so that she can justify her thoughts and feelings about Christians. And so I would sit there and I would listen to all of her stories, sometimes via text message. And I would delete them from my phone just in case somebody picked up my phone and decided to read the last text message from my business partner. And I would sit there and I would do everything. And I remember the first time she did it, I was like, I asked myself in my head while she's doing it, why is she doing this? Because she knows I don't care, and she knows I don't want to know these things. And I heard the Lord say, she's just trying to get you to react. And you know what? This went on for about a year, maybe 1.5 years, a little bit longer. And then one day, it just stopped. And all she wanted to do was ask me questions about my faith. It's a beautiful thing because, you know, I worked with her for about 7 years, and she got to be my biggest cheerleader. She became the person that celebrated every single milestone with me and my family. And the day that I'll never forget, Pastor Jason and I were sitting at Northside Social on a Tuesday morning way too early, and he said, hey, we want to bring you on staff. We want to bring you on staff full time. And me and Tori had worked our tails off to get the dog walking company to a place where we were only working 2 weeks a month. And it was great. And I remember I sat down with her petrified because I was going to tell her I'm getting hired full time at a church. And I want to be a part of the company still, but I can't be involved as I want to anymore. And this story's going entirely too long. But anyways, all that to say, she literally started crying while I was telling her that I was getting hired as a full-time pastor because she knew that that's what I had been called to do. And she knew that my dog walking job with her was just temporary until I stepped into what I was created to do. And I remember just literally petrified. I'm shaking at the table because I think she's going to look at me and be like, well, fine then. You can't do this anymore. Goodbye. goodbye forever type of thing, and just storm out of the restaurant, something hecka dramatic like in a TV show. And she didn't. She sat there and she just started weeping. And I remember thinking, if we would just learn how to respond and listen, even though someone's trying to get a reaction out of us as Christians. Listen, the only reason why they try is because most of the time we do. We react and we show people our judgment all over our bodies without saying anything, and then go, hey, you want to come to church? And guess the last place they want to be is in your judgmental space. So we can learn a lot from Ezra. That was a long way of saying that. But the thing that I want to precursor, the response of Ezra, is this word right here. And you're probably asking yourself the same question I began to ask myself this afternoon. How does unfaithfulness equate to, how is marrying people of another nation unfaithfulness? And remember, Pastor Jason said something really interesting about exile. That exile usually happens because we've been operating out of our own strength. Or unfaithfulness, another way of saying unfaithfulness could just be lack of faith. Right? Or a absence of faith. Bless you. Sorry, I'm reading what I wrote because, yeah, okay. Yikes. Unfaithfulness. How is marrying? And so, one of the things that I've begun to realize in my life of faith as a believer is that when I live from faith, I am not, like I said, like exile, I am not living from my own efforts. But even further than that, I'm not living from my own desires. That's the next step I believe the Lord's leading us into as we continue to enter into this place of what I believe is a renewal of what the Lord is, a renewal of faith, a renewal of mercy, a renewal of the kingdom of God in our midst. And that's not just that we're not operating from, what was the first word I used? We're not operating from our own plans. We're not operating from our own desires. And so one of the things that God explicitly says to the people and to the nation, and I just think sometimes we look at even good desires, like it's not a bad desire to be married, right? Who has a desire to be married, right? Who's married and had a desire to be married? Praise the Lord. Amen, hallelujah. Hopefully you started there. But the truth is that sometimes our desires can be out of order, which then can result in unfaithfulness. And so even in the midst of marriage, a beautiful concept ordained by the Lord, our desire to marry whoever we want is not a product of faith, even though it's a good desire. Right? And so when we die, when we die the death of believing in Jesus and letting him take all of us and enter into death with him, and then through baptism or however you believe, you get resurrected into new life, all of our desires have to die in that place with him as well, not just the bad ones. And I think that for too long, we've only killed the bad desires or the things we've deemed as evil in our life. Like when I got saved, it was really easy for me to give the Lord all of my addictions. It was like, take cancer from me, God, right? What was hard for me to realize was that my addictions to all the things that I thought were really good things also needed to die as well. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. And so we have this backdrop of unfaithfulness and the lack of faith that comes in, that ushers in just, well, an abomination to the idea of God. And thank God we're New Testament believers. Okay, Ezra's response. The first thing I want to talk about with Ezra's response is the confession that he says. Okay, so he says this in verse 3, he says this: when I heard about this matter, I tore my garment and my robe. Good job. There's people who said he pulled out his hair. He postures himself in repentance, as Jason said. Then everyone who trembled at the words of God of Israel, remember, this is a snippet taken from the book of Nehemiah when he was reading the law to the people, so we get a little glimpse of what was actually happening here. Account of the unfaithfulness of the exiles gathered to me, and I sat appalled until that evening. Now the prayer. But at the evening offering, so he was silent and sat stunned in silence for most of the day until twilight. when the evening offering, he says, he arose from my humiliation. Even with my garment and my robe torn, I fell on my knees. I stretched out my hands to the Lord God, my God, and I said, oh my God, I am ashamed and embarrassed to lift my face to you. My God, for our iniquities has risen above our heads, and our guilt has grown even to the heavens. And so the first thing that we see is an honest confession of the corporate sin. Okay, I want to talk about this real quick because I think this is absolutely profound. See, one of the things that we notice in church is that people don't like to talk about their sin. Anybody notice that? Anybody notice that it's just like almost awkward to talk about your sin in church? Isn't that funny? I always thought that was funny because I feel like this should be the only place we should feel safe enough to talk about our sin. Right? But it's the only place where no one has any. Right? I mean, I'm not trying to tell a John Chris joke, but I feel like I am. Because one of the reasons why I feel like sin is not safe to be talked about is because as soon as sin's talked about, there's separation. As soon as sin is talked about, the leader refuses to receive the sin as his own sin. He says, that's your issue, brother. It's time for you to figure that out. You need to walk in more faith. You need to read your Bible more. You need to worship more. You need to talk to God about that. But we see something totally different come from Ezra. He receives the sin of the Levitical line and what's going on in the nation as if it's happening in his own life. See, if we dealt with sin this way, people would be way less afraid to talk about their sin. But we're so used to talking about our sin and then feeling like, oh God, I must be the only one who's struggling with something like this. Instead, Ezra moves towards it, embraces it as his own, and says, if there's a little leaven in the lump, then the whole lump is leavened. See, it would be easy for us to talk about our sin, and it would be easy for us to be better at overcoming our sin if we had a community around us who looked at my sin as if it was your sin. And some of us are like, whoa, Jordan, I would work too hard to be known as a sinner. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to take all that work away from you. Because the New Testament says something really profound. It says if you do not have sin, then you are not a believer, and the love of God is not in you. That's what 1 John says. You are a liar. Oof. So you do have sin, because if you say you don't, you're a liar, and that's a sin. So praise the Lord. Okay, so his response is, sorry, I went straight to prayer, but his response is he mourns. We see him mourn. We see him receive with humility. It says in verse 5, it says that he arose from his humiliation. That Hebrew word there is just a word that means humble. He received from his humbled state. He allowed the sin that was going on around him to remind him that he too was a human being. That's profound. That's profound. Because he is saying, I am not superhuman just because I've been sent here to show you the law. He's saying, if you have this sin, then there's sin like that somewhere in my life as well too, and we should all deal with this together. So we see him receive humility. He acknowledges his humanness. And then we see this. We see him absolutely fully surrender. In verse 5 and 6, he says, but evening offering, I rose from my humiliation. Even with my garment, my robe torn, I fell on my knees. I stretched out my hands to the Lord, my God. This, in the ancient Near East, is a sign of complete surrender and dependence. It's the posture you would take before a king. And so what he does from his repentant, humble, human state is say, Lord, I actually can't fix this problem. And he says, I know the knowledge that could lead these people, but you're the one who transforms the people. And so I submit all of this to you, and I am so darn sorry, and we're going to see that because his prayer is beautiful. We see that in his prayer, there's an honest confession of the corporate sin, right? It rips the authority from sin, and it also makes it for a open canvas for us to come in and say, I've got this going on in my life. I've got this going on in my life. I've got this going on in my life, okay? We could make this a safe place for sin. Oof. Like... Then there is an awareness of guilt. I think that is an interesting word for us New Testament Christians. Can I say something I've just noticed? And I've got to finish fast. Holy cow. Got me talking about stories, dog walking. Good Lord. I think there's something, this word guilt is like a New Testament cuss word. I'm serious. Like if you have guilt, like, brother, you are condemned by God. He took your guilt and your shame on the cross, brother. You do not need to feel all that guilt and shame. I remember being told that quite a bit when I first got saved, because I had a lot of guilt. But see, I think there's something really interesting that Ezra's prayer acknowledges, and that's that there's an awareness of guilt. And if we can be aware of guilt and not try to suppress guilt, we'll actually receive the gift that guilt is trying to communicate to us. I remember years ago, the Lord said to me, Jordan, it's like a pre-marriage struggle, okay? It's like one of those things that just involves tons of shame. All right, y'all already know what I'm talking about. Good. Every guy in the room was like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Pre-marriage struggle involves lots of shame, and I remember feeling like, God, I hate feeling shame. This is so depressing. I know you took my shame on the cross, so can I not feel that? And he goes, Jordan, shame, you'll stop feeling it if you just acknowledge what it's trying to tell you. This is before I knew anything about core emotions, Krista. And I remember thinking in my head, what is shame trying to tell me? And he said, just so delicately whispered to me that you're trying to do this life out of your own strength. And I was like, oh. See, because guilt is just communicating, so his acknowledgement and the awareness of guilt is just communicating to God that they need freedom. But the way that freedom comes, the gift of guilt is freedom, but it comes by experiencing forgiveness. See, guilt, if you let it communicate to you what it needs, it will just lead you to the place of being forgiven by the one who can. You'll stop trying to fix your own problems and keep yourself from the place of feeling guilty, and you'll actually receive forgiveness, will then usher you into freedom. Because there's a pattern that comes forth through Ezra, and you see it because he continuously tries to re-put himself as Moses in the story, is that the people of God are guilty in the garden. The people of God are guilty in the wilderness. The people of God are guilty in the land of Canaan. The people of God are guilty past exile. It's a human condition. Guilt. It's trying to tell you something. If you feel guilty, it's not because you've not done something wrong. Hopefully not. I never felt guilty for not doing something wrong. I don't walk around and just like kill it as a husband and play with my kids all night long and go to bed just like, I'm just guilt-ridden. No, it's trying to communicate something to you. And Ezra's awareness of it is him trying to communicate like, hey, you want to know how you keep yourself from exile? You deal with what's making you feel guilty and you receive forgiveness from it so you can move on. So that you can enter into the freedom that God's always desired for you to live in. And then I'm not even going to be able to camp in this the way I would love, but I'd love to camp here. Because Ezra then acknowledges something that I think we face all the time in the New Testament church and as New Testament believers, that we're disobedient in the face of grace. Like we have all the grace in the world has been extended to us. What does Ezra say? All of this grace has been given to us to be a remnant people to come back. And look at you guys. Just look at us. We just don't know how to keep messing up, how to stop messing up. That sounds familiar. I mean, that sounds real in my life. Right? I'm like, oof, yeah, sounds like one of them greasy grace messages. Greasy grace, hyper grace. That was the cool word in the Reformed Church 10 years ago. But I think it's interesting because it's the grace extended to them that leaves them as a remnant. And this is the grace that gets extended. They get to escape as a remnant, that they get to have a small group of people moving back towards Jerusalem post-exile. They see that as grace. But the grace of the God that gets extended to them, that he gives them a peg in his holy tent. That word peg is a Hebrew word that means like a secure hold. And when he's saying tent, they're acknowledging the presence of God, because that's where the presence dwelt. And so the grace of God extended to the nation of Israel is that they get to be a small group that comes back to worship him, that they get a secure hold to the presence of God once again. But I think something that's really interesting about Ezra's prayer and his response to this unfaithfulness and this abomination is that he understands that he can't actually fix this, that he has to rely on the mercy of God to come and solve this problem. We see two words for that, two Hebrew words for mercy show up in this passage. The words right here, Hanan and Hesed. That's the word that gets translated grace there. I loved what one translation, I wrote it down because I was like, oof. Hanan means to stoop in kindness to one who's inferior. Ooh. Oh, I'm like, I tattoo that on my body. Stoop in kindness to one who is inferior. Ooh. I'm like, I need that in my life. I need him to do that to me. Hanan, that's how I live. And then mercy, Hesed, that's his loving kindness. But I think it fails to acknowledge that what Ezra is beckoning from the Lord to come and to heal this issue inside of them is his covenantal loyalty. That's him reminding God of the covenant that he didn't just make with Moses, but going back even further, he made to Abraham. And that's that they would be a community of faith. And so what we see is that Ezra's prayer does not call on the people to be active, but he calls on the mercy of God to come and be active in their midst. Because he understands that the future only rests on the fact that God is the God of Israel, and he desires for their renewal more than they can actually lead themselves towards it. Okay, chapter 10, just because we're going to hammer through this and then I'm going to pray for you guys. We see in Ezra chapter 10 this response. There's this guy. In fact, I want you got your Bibles, I want you to look at verse 31. Okay, I just want you to know this was selected for me to teach tonight because maybe my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was somehow involved in this. It says that the sons of Harim, Eleazar, Shishajath, Malchijah, Shemaiah, and Shimeon. Yes, I know, I'm famous. I'm just messing around. Sorry, I saw my name in there and I was like, I have to bring this up. It says this, that now Ezra's praying, and he's praying not like a person who is disconnected. It's like he's feeling intensely, and he is expressing intensely what he's feeling. And so he's feeling the weight of the sin and the abomination that he has now acknowledged is in their midst. He's accepted that he is a part of and responsible because he is a part of the community. And he begins to pray, and his prayer is so loud it says that a people group start to come and form around him. And it says while he was praying and making confession, weeping, prostrating himself before the house of God, a large assembly of women and children and men gathered to him from Israel as he wept loudly. See, I think there's something really profound about being an Ezra, and that's that you get to wear your heart on your sleeve. You get to wear your emotions out loud. I think we've been told for too long your emotions don't have a place in church. But I'm here to tell you that if your heart doesn't break for the sin that's in other people's lives, then I'm not sure that you're leading like an Ezra. I'm not sure you're leading like an Ezra. Ezra's not the person who's married to a woman from another nation, and he's prostrating himself and weeping before the house of the Lord. I can't remember the last time I wept for someone else's sin. Like self-accusation, like I don't know the last time someone else's sin broke me that wasn't direct. Like, nah, I can't think of a time. It's been a long time. But this is what I believe. Good leadership gives space for good leaders, because what we see take place is there's this man that emerges, and this is a difficult issue. They put his name in there like loud and clear, hang his laundry out. Shekinah, the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elam. You want to know why I think this is like a super sensitive subject? And they even say this. They're like, hey, listen, we ain't going to be able to clean this mess up in a day. This is a big issue. We got lots of problems. This guy might have even been the product of one of those marriages, because his dad is listed in the names. So this is not like some like youngster that doesn't have to pay the price if something like this is actually going to do it. And so he comes forth and he says, we have been unfaithful to our God and have married foreign women from the peoples of the land. Yet now there's hope for the Israel in spite of this. I love that response. He sees the way that they have a leader that's been put in place that feels broken by their disobedience. And he says, but there's hope. There's hope because we have a leader. We have a leader who desires to follow the standard of God. And so now let us make covenant with our God to put away all the wives and their children according to the counsel of my Lord, and for those who tremble at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. Arise. I like that. For this matter is your responsibility, but we will be with you. Be courageous and act. I think one of the things that we see emerging is now there's this passing from Ezra to this young gentleman, Shekinah. And he says, you guys go and do this, and we will walk with you. So now not only is it the sin that's corporate, now they're willing to walk with them in the solution to the issue. See, this church is the model for how we deal with sin. We don't just acknowledge it and not walk with. We don't create separation. We don't say, time for you to figure that out. Maybe you should find an accountability partner. Somebody that you can call when you mess up, because that doesn't feel bad. Sorry, I've always loved accountability partners. But I think this, Ezra 9 and 10, puts forth an incredible model for us as the church of what it means to deal with sin and renewal. We have to do it in a different way, because the ways that we've been doing it have not created public lives where people feel safe to be human. What we've done is we've created closeted lives where holiness is a mask we wear and sin is something we hide in a closet. And I'm here to say that if Ezra can do it, we can do it. If Ezra can do it without Jesus as a model, then we can do it. And we get to empower people by being good leaders and by showing them that it's not just about acknowledging sin, but also walking with those people in the ways that they need to fix the issues that have been presented. I wrote this, and I'm just going to read it because I didn't say it this clearly. I said, as leaders of faith, our heart for seeing people set free have to be tied to the deepest parts of ourselves. And I think that's what we see emerge from Ezra in the first part of Ezra chapter 10. The rest of the chapter shows that most of the guys that have been confronted with this issue, outside of a couple of them, are like, yeah, we'll do it. And I don't necessarily believe they chose the right option. I'm just going to be plain with you, because we see Nehemiah deal with this issue in Nehemiah 13 in a totally different way. He's like, yeah, we're not going to divorce this round. Y'all can just stick together and make sure they convert to Judaism. Which I think could have been a good option here. But old Shekinah had an idea from the Lord. Sorry, I want to sing a song. And so I believe that as we just wrap up the book of Ezra, the invitation for all of us is to be renewal-esque leaders, to be leaders that lead like Ezra, that bring a profound, renewed understanding of what it means to be a community and to pursue God in worship. Because this is what he does, and this is how he deals with sin. And I think it's a beautiful model, and I think it's one that we don't see in the church very often. I think there's certain groups that are really, really good. But oftentimes, unless we've partaken of the same sin, we don't have compassion for it. And I don't think that's what we see from Ezra. We don't see somebody that fully understands what it means to marry someone from another nation so that he has compassion. We see him have compassion because he desires for the people to walk in freedom, the way God desires them to walk in freedom. And it breaks his heart to think that they have to live in a space that would be separated from God. And I think that that is a message for all of us to really ponder and to think through as we move into the book of Nehemiah. Amen? All right, let's go ahead and pray. Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for your word. We thank you that even prior to the appearing of your Son, the one in whom redefines all of our understanding and takes away all of our sin at the appearance of the one who declares the Father, that you've provided forth such a beautiful model of leadership and how to address things that cause separation between us and you. Lord, my request to you tonight is that you would make us a community. That you would make us a community that is safe. That you would make us a community that is holy and that is set apart and that welcomes in people who are not like us, and that we're willing to accept them and we're willing to walk with them towards you. Lord, my heart for all of us is that we would be a safe place for people to come and talk about being a human. What it means to live for you and to live according to the way that you set forth by your kingdom. Jesus, we love you so much. We thank you. We thank you. I thank you for every person in this room. Bless them tonight as they go. Bless their rest. Give them dreams tonight, Lord. Give them a great rest of their week. In Jesus' name, amen. Love y'all.